Hello, everyone. So I know that I didn't make one of these last year, but since I decided to make a regular season predictions video like I did, I suppose I ought to just finish it off the right way too and make myself a playoff bracket. So I did this last year too, I just didn't make any videos for it. But last year, I believe I predicted Georgia to win before the season began, and then when the bracket came out, I picked Texas. I was kind of close to that. Ohio State ends up going on a run as the 8 seed and wins it all, but of course, there was a lot of motivation behind their run, so it was no shocker. As well as, in my opinion, the favorite before that point. Georgia had a lot of injuries plaguing them, the most specific one being their quarterback being injured. And that was big for them, but that same quarterback that started last year in the playoff will be starting it this year and has more experience under his belt. So let's just jump in, give you sort of a reaction to all of what I think too. So I know that the field 1 through 12 was Indiana, which is very shocking considering historically how bad they've been. So for them to be 13-0 and win a Big Ten championship for the first time in 80 years is insane. Two, you have Ohio State, the team that just came up 3 points short in the Big Ten championship game. We're number one before that, now number two. The SEC champion, Georgia, three. Texas Tech, Big 12 champion, four. And that's your four bye week teams. Last year, the deal was that you had to be a conference champion to get a top four bye, but now it's just straight seeding. So it's the best four teams that get it. Those are your best four teams that get a bye week. Then 5 through 12, you already see who 5 is on my screen. Oregon 5th, Ole Miss 6th, Texas A&M 7th, Oklahoma 8th, Alabama 9th, which was controversial. They lost last night in their championship game. But at the same time, they should not be penalized for playing. And in my opinion, is that they should not be penalized for it. If there was an argument to leave them out, it was the horrendous loss they had at the beginning of the season to Florida State, who ended up not making a bowl game. That's a horrible loss. But since that was not a relevant talking point, I believe you have to let Alabama in. So I don't think they made the wrong decision. But if there was an argument to be made, it was the loss to Florida State at the beginning of the season. Then 10, you have the last at-large team to make it, which would end up being Miami. The most controversial thing being that Notre Dame had held a firm lead over Miami for about 3 or 4-ish weeks in the Tuesday night rankings that would happen through the month of November. And then finally, in the last rankings, they go head-to-head against each other. The committee decides to value the head-to-head win Miami had over Notre Dame, puts them in at 10, and they're the last at-large team in. And then you have Tulane and James Madison, who win the American and the Sun Belt respectively, two mid-major conferences and make the playoff as 11 and 12 seeds. That's also another thing, sort of controversial. People don't like the fact that two of them made it, but if it's got to be the top 5 conference champions, you got them in. So there you go. But just a crazy night of football overall yesterday. In fact, I believe it to be the craziest ever in the history of the sport, considering that a combined 213 years of conference championship winning drought ended between Indiana, Texas Tech, and Duke. And then in the FCS, you had a major upset with North Dakota State losing in the second round of the FCS playoffs. I believe their earliest exit since joining the FCS 21, 22-ish years ago. So crazy day of college football yesterday. But enough of that being said, let's just get that out of the way. I just wanted to give some of my initial reactions of what happened last night and this bracket. But I think we're in for a good one. I think it might actually be better than last year. First off, I get thrown straight into a game that I've been kind of back and forth on since it first was revealed. Now, lots of people seem to think that because on paper this is probably the biggest disparity of a matchup there is in this first round, I still happen to think James Madison might just push Oregon more than we expect. And the reason I think is because Oregon could very well be the most overrated team in this playoff. Not because of them playing nobody, but because of just how lucky they've been to not lose some games that in reality they played horrible in. And because they won those games, they're here in this spot as the number 5 seed because they've only lost one game. So it's kind of hard to leave them out. You got to put them in and put them in at 5. You know, they earn that right to be that high. So that's where they're at. And James Madison just barely gets in. Let's be honest, they were lucky to get in because the ACC played themselves out of it. Virginia would have been the team that solidified them being left out, and they end up getting beat in their conference championship game, and that leaves Virginia and Duke out. Of course, Miami would end up saving the ACC by getting in as an at-large, but no ACC auto bid. James Madison steals that and gets in as the 5th ranked conference champion. I got to be honest, because I am such a CAA homer. If you guys don't know, not only am I a big FCS football fan, in collegiate athletics overall, I am a massive Colonial Athletic Association fan. So I am a big fan of that conference. I think in all sports, whether that be basketball, lacrosse, football, I think they're pretty good in all sports, and I think they're one of the funnest conferences to watch in every sport. So James Madison came from there. That's where they played before they moved to the Sun Belt 3 or 4-ish years ago under the now head coach at Indiana, Curt Cignetti. Google him, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I win. Google me.
I think people forget that he still has a long-lasting blueprint on this program, despite not having been the coach there in 2 years. Now, the coach that took over for him last year is moving on to a new job in UCLA. So that just goes to show that how prestigious that lineage of guys that he brought there was. And, man, do I so badly. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I want to take James Madison. I want to take James Madison to beat Oregon, but I can't. Since I've come to rational conclusion and thought, I just cannot pick, I can't pick James Madison here. I was about to say Oregon, but I meant James Madison. I want to pick James Madison to beat Oregon, but my rational thinking mind tells me that just, I feel like even if they play really, really well and Oregon plays terribly, I still don't feel like there's enough there. But let me tell you, if I would love to take James Madison. I'd love to. I love the CAA, love everything about it. Huge Stony Brook fan. I know most of their history was played either in the Big South or the America East Conference, but I've been a massive fan of the CAA since they've been in it, and I didn't mean to advance that far yet. We've only covered one first-round game. So yeah, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to take James Madison, a former Colonial Athletic Association member, I will go with the Oregon Ducks to get this done. But I think it might be closer than we expect, and I might take James Madison in the spread. We'll see how I feel heading into that game. But I think it will be Oregon that advances to the Orange Bowl to play the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Next up, you have a rematch of the SEC Championship. That's right, I went through all the seeding already, so I knew that was a rematch. Yeah, I think this will be a fun one, despite both teams offensively not being great, I would say. So yeah, this is going to be a fun matchup, fun rematch. Again, both teams have no idea how to play any offense, it seems. Okay, so based on the first time I watched this matchup, neither team had any offense. And that was a big part of why Alabama lost at the game in Tuscaloosa. But they still couldn't manage to win that game despite outgaining Oklahoma by almost double the yardage. Now the game's in Norman because Oklahoma beat Alabama head-to-head and essentially take away the SEC championship game. They both have an identical record, so you have to value that head-to-head and put Oklahoma ahead of Alabama, and they do. That was a good decision. I just can't help but feel like if we're going to talk about a game of this type of magnitude, an official playoff game, one team advances, one team's out, I just can't help but feel like Alabama's got to win this rematch. I know that Oklahoma is very well capable of winning this again and beating Alabama, especially at home on a Friday night in that environment, Norman, Oklahoma. I also have to admit, as a Missouri fan, I hate Oklahoma. Some people think that that's not even a rivalry, but I would say, in my opinion, Oklahoma is our second or third closest rival behind Kansas and maybe Nebraska. So definitely more of a rivalry than people think, and it's going to start to become one more and more because they're in the SEC now after leaving us for 12 years. Anyway, enough of that being said and enough of my bias out of the way. I will take Oklahoma. Probably once again going to be a close, low-scoring game. I expect Alabama to execute a little bit better in this game and do what they should have done the first time these two teams played. That way, they don't have to worry about being in a situation where it's coming down to a field goal or turnovers to decide the game. I think Alabama's even fine if they turn the ball over once, but I think it was 3 or 4 times they turned it over the first time. Next up, we have the other Group of 5 team in their matchup against Ole Miss, and this is another one that I considered to be interesting and that I thought I might pull the trigger on an upset here, but The reason I think I'm not going to do that, despite all the drama Ole Miss is going through and despite the fact that this is a rematch from the regular season and it's hard to beat the same team twice, my reasoning for why I'll take Ole Miss is because I just think, as opposed to James Madison with their matchup in Oregon, Ole Miss is just that they're not the type of team that's going to lose the game by giving the other team opportunities. They're not going to make a whole lot of mistakes, and they have really efficient skill players. I just feel like that alone is going to be enough for them to beat Tulane now, albeit not by 5 touchdowns this time. It will be enough for the Rebels to win again and advance to the Sugar Bowl, where they'll play Georgia, and unironically, another rematch. And then finally, the last first-round game you have, Miami at Texas A&M. This is first shot to play the defending national champs at the Cotton Bowl. As a Missouri fan, I saw our team get blown out by 31 points on the road against this team last year in a noon game at their stadium in Kyle Field. Of course, I think this year's Miami is better than our team last year, but I am going to take Texas A&M at home to get the job done, and I think they will advance to the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic to face the Ohio State Buckeyes. All right, so now we get to the second round of the playoff. We've got the first matchup here being the Orange Bowl between Oregon and Texas Tech. Now, you guys can already see my wheels churning trying to pick between James Madison and Oregon, and really, it should not have been that hard, but I so badly wanted to be biased and take the CAA to win that game. Now, I say the CAA. I know James Madison is now a Sun Belt team, but it's representation from their original conference. It's like, hey, finally they went up to the next level, and they're showing everybody what this conference was all about for all the years they played in it. And let's not forget, too, when James Madison was a member back in 2010, they went on the road and upset, I believe at the time, number 13 Virginia Tech, 21-16, one of the greatest upsets of all time, at least on the scale of it being between two different classifications and the point spread. But yeah, anyway, with Oregon, it's my opinion that there are going to be a lot of folks that pick Oregon in this game. I actually like Texas Tech, and I don't even think it's that close. Now, I think Oregon, okay, maybe I shouldn't say that it won't be close, because I think Oregon can definitely keep this competitive. But first off, there's a story coming in. This is a rematch from 2 seasons ago. Both head coaches were there, and a lot of these same players played each other in that same game. The game was in Lubbock, Texas. I think Oregon won by 8. This is a revenge game for Texas Tech. Yeah, even though it's been a couple of years now, they both still remember playing each other, especially the two coaches, and I think Texas Tech is now in a better situation where I think almost definitively they should be able to win this with comfort and ease. I'm not going to necessarily say Oregon can't make this like a down-to-the-wire type game, but I think Texas Tech can win this game very similarly to all their other games this year. Somewhat comfortable and kind of decisively. So, yeah, not much in my opinion to say there about Texas Tech and Oregon other than this is a revenge game that I think is clear. This one will clearly go to the Red Raiders, I think. Like I said, there are going to be a lot of people think it's Big 10 versus Big 12. I'll take the Big 10 team. I won't think that way about this because, I think Texas Tech, outside of the two big conferences, the Big 10 and the SEC, might be the most legit they might be the most legit out of any team not in one of those two conferences, but they've just had a really, really good season. And I mentioned that I think Oregon's pretty fraudulent, so I think that's going to come out here in this game. I like the Red Raiders to get that done. Then the Rose Bowl game. Now despite Indiana being the 1 seed, and very concisely so, I still think this is going to be a tough game. This is going to be a tough game because Alabama's still Alabama and Indiana's still Indiana. At least at the end of the day, that's how I think of this. Now, yes, man, as much as I've been starting to get on the Indiana bandwagon, and I do believe they're a legit national title contender, despite what I may think here, that doesn't take that away that they still could be and that they might be totally fine. But, man, I can't help but feel like I got to go. First off, I might be somewhat biased because I did pick Alabama. You guys saw that video when I did my initial playoff predictions all the way back in, I think it was late August. Yeah, it was late August. I did my initial playoff predictions. I had Alabama winning it all against Texas. And I think because Alabama snuck in, I still want to be fairly firm on taking Alabama, at least through bias. That's how I'm going to be. And gosh darn it, I think I'm going to. Man, Indiana's had an amazing season, and they're a legit team. I watched in the 2 games that they played a pretty legit opponent, I'd say, in Oregon and Ohio State. They were really good on both sides of the ball, or at the very least, They controlled the game with how they played in the lines of scrimmage. I really like that about Indiana. But Alabama is on their best day probably just about as good. They're just a pesky team to play. So it's a shame that Indiana, they're seeing the same thing Oregon did though last year, being the 13-0 team that represented the Big Ten. Despite how you should be set up in a position that's favorable for you to run all the way to the national championship game and be able to win it, getting the 8 versus the 9, that's a really, really tough matchup because both teams are going to be really good. First off, they're teams that could beat either one of each other, but then after being battle-tested with that game, especially the 9 seed in Alabama having to go on the road and beat Oklahoma in a rematch, then they're going to play Indiana in the Rose Bowl game. Like I mentioned, a team that historically they're used to not being in this situation and finding a way to lose, and Alabama being used to doing nothing but winning. I feel like that's honestly going to play really, really well here, despite the fact that Indiana has clearly had the better season, and I honestly think, other than Ohio State, probably head and shoulders above everybody. I think that this playoff has done a good job over the last season, and I think this season as well will bring a lot of teams like in Indiana down to earth, despite having the season that they did. So it's a shame for Indiana to drop out here, but I like Alabama, much like in the rematch against Oklahoma, to do a lot of things right, to execute well. I think they get the job done. They advance to the semifinal. The All-State Sugar Bowl, you have Ole Miss and Georgia, and as good of a rematch as this is, man, I don't think there's a whole lot of a debate here. I think as much as I think Ole Miss talent-wise and on paper is good enough to compete with Georgia and potentially come in here and win this, I just think with the disarray they're in, they're very fortunate that they could get through Tulane just because they already had the talent advantage there and the scheme advantage. I don't think you have enough of that against Georgia here without Lane Kiffin to win that game. I like the Bulldogs there in the Sugar Bowl and to avenge what they failed to do last year, which was beat Notre Dame to advance to the semifinal. I think they actually get it done this year. And they're in a better position than they were last year to win a national title, so I think that bodes better for them as well. But darn, are they in a bad spot in the semifinal, because I think either one of these teams that come out of this Cotton Bowl game are going to be tough. You've got number 7 Texas A&M against number 2 Ohio State, and I think I just said it myself, along with Indiana, they've been head and shoulders above everybody, but then I just took Alabama, so I can't just take the easy way out and not do a deep analysis of this game as well. Because again, Texas A&M, a lot of things they bring to the table where they could give Ohio State a hard time. They've got a quarterback that knows how to run, and historically under Brian Day and Urban Meyer both, they struggled to stop those types of quarterbacks, and it brings a level of uncertainty to the defense that Ohio State might not be prepared for. But I happen to think that despite what Texas A&M brings to the table that could throw Ohio State off, I still don't think it's enough. Again, this has been the best team throughout pretty much all of the regular season. Up until last night when Indiana beat them, they were the best team from top to bottom that whole way through. And then that happens, and it shows that Ohio State can be brought down to earth. But at the same time, I think they needed that humbling so they could learn that they were still human, but at the same time, still also capable of running it back and winning the national championship again. I think Ohio State went through exactly what they need to learn and to get better. I like them to beat Texas A&M, and very much similar to how I said Texas Tech would beat Oregon, a comfortable win, and they advance to the semifinal where they'll play Georgia in the Fiesta Bowl in a rematch of 2022 matchup. All right, so next up we've got Texas Tech and Alabama in the Peach Bowl. Now, I should mention before going deeper into this, Texas Tech had the highest NIL class and the most booster funding there was in the sport of college football this year, which that makes them essentially the Ohio State of last year, and we all remember how that went. So that explains how Texas Tech has gotten as far as they've gotten when historically they've not been very good whatsoever. So yeah, the ability to hit the transfer portal and NIL can change your program overnight. That's what helps that Lubbock has such good boosters. But yet they're going up against the greatest college football program of all time, which means that Alabama's always going to be top 10 in probably about everything, meaning they're well-oiled all around the board. But of course, they still they're not the team they were when they had Nick Saban. That's obvious because they're the 9 seed for a reason. They went 10-3 and have the most losses out of any team that made this field. But yet at the same time, they're from a battle-tested conference, and lots of people love the SEC, and there's a reason for that. But as you can see, half the remaining field is actually not from the SEC. But yet last year, I don't think we had a single SEC team in the field, so that's crazy that even 2 are in it this year. But yet I think that just last year was a little bit weird. None of the road teams won in the first round. Then all of the lower seeded teams won in the second round. And then the lower 2 seeded teams from that point forward, actually, after the first round, all the favorites won, then all the lower seeded teams won. It was crazy. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. Now I've got it kind of being halfway like that. Half of it's the teams. Now Texas Tech is the higher seeded team over Oregon. But most would say that Oregon would probably be the favorite, so that's why Texas Tech making it here probably feels weird. But like I said, they have the top class in NIL and the most booster spending money there was in college football this year, so that helped them get to this point. And like I said, Oregon, very overrated, I think. They were lucky in a lot of games, lucky to be as far as they are here in the playoff. So that's why I took Texas Tech there. And in my mind, for the longest time, I think I was sold that James Madison was going to beat Oregon. So I had Texas Tech for sure winning that. I think Oregon's overrated, so I think Texas Tech wins that game either way. It doesn't matter who they play. And then Alabama, it's a shame for Indiana that their season had to end the way that it did. But Alabama decided that we're not going to Google Kurt Cinetti, so.
I think what these guys really wanted to sort of gain was more respect. Not just the fact that they were underdogs, but you guys gave us a lot of really positive rat poison. The rat poison that you usually give us is usually fatal. But the rat poison that you put out there this week was yummy.
I guess he's got to live with that, and Alabama does what Alabama does. They keep on winning, and I think that explains why I'm going to stick with my original pick before I started this video, because I envisioned already what I was going to decide before I even filmed this video. I basically already had my national champion decided before I even recorded this video. So yeah, I still have Alabama going on this deep run all the way to the national championship, despite being a 9th seed that, other than in this first round game, probably will not be favored. They arguably shouldn't be favored in that game either if we're going to consider the favorites to be the higher seeds. But yet, it's a rematch from the regular season in which Alabama was honestly the better team. So, other than that, though, it is a bit of a run, them having to beat Indiana and Texas Tech. But again, those are historically bad programs, and I'm acting as if that matters towards this season. But there's a reason why Alabama's in the field and has a chance to play for a national championship, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be here. So yes, I've still got, despite, honestly, every reason to take Texas Tech, like I said, them being the top class in NIL this year and booster spending, but that meaning they just bring an amalgamation of amazing talent in that's probably going to be first-round NFL material. I still got to take Alabama. My gut feeling is telling me that despite Texas Tech being much like Indiana, being a legit team, despite having no history of being decent or even good in college football whatsoever, I think that it still isn't going to matter. I think Alabama gets the job done. They go on a run after nearly being snubbed to the playoff, but still just getting in. I think they're going to prove everyone why they deserve to get in, much like they did in 2017, debatably snubbing maybe Ohio State that year, who won the Big Ten. That just seems to be a thing Alabama does when they're not quite at the top of their game like they are most years, especially during the Saban era. They're going to come out and prove why they're still a top dog, despite not being that supposed same team they were back in the day. So let's now move on to the other semifinal game, the Fiesta Bowl, which is a rematch from the 2022 Peach Bowl between Ohio State and Georgia, which, if most of you were like me, you believe that the wrong team probably won that game. Not to say that the outcome itself was not legit, and the kicker for Ohio State missing that field goal, I honestly forgot his name, and again, for good reason. I think it was Drew Chrisman. But yeah, he misses that field goal, and Georgia wins at the strike of midnight to advance to the national championship, where they would then go on to destroy TCU 65-7. The worst championship game in the history of college football. Ohio State has a chance to avenge that loss, and honestly, I feel pretty good about their chances, just because despite Georgia still winning the SEC, I don't really feel like they're that great of a team. I mean, Georgia, they deserve to be where they're at based on what they objectively accomplished winning the SEC and only having one close loss to Alabama. But at the same time, I have not been blown away by them, while with Ohio State, I am blown away by them every week, despite them not even playing necessarily good teams. They just find a way to maybe start off ugly, and they will obliterate their opponent some way or another every week. Of course, other than when they've played the Texases and the Indianas of the college football world in this season. But other than that, they have been head and shoulders above everyone else they've played. I just happen to think the slight edge, and again, the committee believed this too, that's why they put Ohio State ahead of Georgia. I happen to agree that the committee made the right decision here. I like the Ohio State Buckeyes to advance to the national championship for the second straight year, and they are on the verge of going back-to-back just like Georgia did in 21 and 22. And they have a decent chance to do so because they play the 9 seed in Alabama, who again did not have an up-to-standard season for what they're normally used to. But they still show that they're the same Alabama and that they're capable of going and getting it done like they always have been. So if you guys don't remember, I was very, very close to picking this before the season began. But the reason I went against it is because I didn't believe Ohio State could beat Texas even one time. And yet they did to begin the season, and that honestly screwed Texas. So I had these two teams flip-flopped. I thought Ohio State would be the 9 seed, having 3 losses with a loss in their conference championship. And I thought Alabama would be the 2 seed as the SEC champ that had 2 losses, not one like Ohio State, but still. The point is that I had these two teams completely flipped from where I have them now, but yet still meeting in the national championship game. But because of that reality, I think I'm actually going to flip my pick as well. Man, do I hate going against my initial picks because I guess it hurts my pride a little bit. Yes, I will admit it. I am a little egotistical when it comes to this. I'm just going to be completely straight up and honest. I think most of us were thinking the entire season Ohio State has looked like the best team from top to bottom. Now, yeah, they laid a bit of a dud in the Big Ten championship, but I think they needed that to get their head cleared for the playoff and to be focused on the right thing. Despite me picking Alabama initially and me wanting to still pick them out of bias for what I predicted, I'm going to take my home state, Ohio State Buckeyes, to get the job done and to repeat as national champions.
Coach, you knew this one wasn't going to be easy, but it came down to the wire. And what can you say about the performance from your quarterback, Kyle McCord, to finish that drive?
Toughness, that's it. Physicality, across the board, finish it off, having guts. You know, like I like to know where Lou Holtz is right now. What he said about our team, I cannot believe. This is a tough team right here. We're proud to be from Ohio, and it's always been Ohio against the world, and it'll continue to be Ohio against the world. But I'll tell you what, I love those kids, and we got a tough team.
I am going to go through and do a score prediction for all these games later on tonight to determine what I'm going to put down as my total points scored in the playoff for the tiebreaker. I won't do that here because that would take too much time for me to go through and simulate all the games in my mind, but I will do that later. I appreciate all of you for watching. If you guys want to join my CFP Bracket Challenge group, check the link in the description below. It will be right down there if you want to join and participate for a chance to win some fun prizes. And maybe just have some fun, you know, because when you compete with other people, it makes watching this and keeping up with this playoff a whole lot more fun, especially if maybe your favorite school didn't make it. If you guys want to check it out in the link in the description below, it'll be right down there for you. This has been your boy, signing off. Have a good one.